I was just saying, Louis doesn't understand social distancing. So he goes out like wanting to cuddle everything, and particularly any babies younger than him.
Here's something that happened inside the palace that nobody expected to see. For months, Prince Louis simply vanished from every single public event. No explanation, no statement, just gone. And when his mother finally broke her silence about it on camera, she couldn't even get through her prepared remarks without tears streaming down her face. But here's what's wild. What she said without a script ended up exposing a family struggle that had been quietly tearing the household apart from the inside. If you want to understand what really happened behind closed palace doors, and why one 8-year-old boy's absence ended up changing the entire royal family's approach to privacy, stay with me, because this story gets deeper than you'd ever expect. Make sure you're subscribed right now, because we're about to uncover something the palace almost never talks about. So when King Charles started his cancer treatment at the start of 2024, everything shifted. William suddenly had way more royal responsibilities piling on top of him than he'd ever handled before. Catherine, meanwhile, was managing her own health struggles while desperately trying to keep their 3 kids' lives feeling somewhat normal, even though nothing really was. Their main focus became protecting George, Charlotte, and especially Louis from the constant media machine that never stops hunting for photos and stories about the younger royals. This was always their priority, but suddenly it became absolutely urgent. Then something happened that caught everyone off guard. Last week, Catherine sat down in front of the camera with a fully prepared speech ready to go. You know how these things work. Palace communications team writes every single word. Other advisors check it over multiple times. They polish every sentence until it's absolutely perfect and sounds exactly like a royal statement should sound. She started reading it. But then she did something absolutely shocking. She looked at those papers for a moment, and then she literally put them face down on the table. Everything prepared, everything approved, everything safe. She just set it aside and started speaking from her heart about Louis. No notes. No pre-approved lines, no heads up to the staff that she was about to do this. That's almost unheard of. But what came next made it even more powerful. About 2/3 of the way through talking about her youngest son, Catherine's voice got shaky and tears actually started falling. She didn't pause. She didn't ask for a break or try to compose herself. She just kept talking through the tears, and honestly, that's what made the whole thing hit so hard. Because watching someone push through their emotions while speaking reveals just how much they truly mean what they're saying. Here's the thing about Kensington Palace. It operates like a perfectly controlled machine. Unscripted moments basically never happen. Emotional displays are almost never allowed in public. Every tiny update about George, Charlotte, or Louis gets planned weeks in advance, approved by multiple people, and only released when the timing feels exactly right. This isn't random. This has been their system for over a decade. So the real question isn't just what Catherine said that day. The massive question is what would make someone as disciplined and careful as her just throw out the entire plan and speak from genuine emotion instead. Clearly something had been going on behind the scenes that nobody on the outside fully understood. People across the UK started noticing weird shifts happening. Royal events kept getting changed or rearranged with barely any notice. Schedules flipped at the last second. Louis kept missing from public appearances one after another, but there was never any reason given. And that silence? It started eating away at people. Every reporter who tried asking why Louis wasn't being seen in public got the exact same response, word for word: family privacy. That's it. No details, no promise of future explanation, just that one line, over and over. But wait, here's where it gets interesting. That wasn't an accident at all. William actually made a conscious decision to stay completely silent about the whole thing, and he had his reasons. He genuinely believed his kids deserved as much privacy as humanly possible, and he was willing to push back against anyone who disagreed with him. However, not everyone inside the palace household was on the same page. Some senior advisors actually warned him that going completely silent for too long could backfire. They said people would only generate wilder and wilder theories in the absence of real information. They genuinely believed that saying nothing might actually create the exact problem he was trying to prevent. William listened to all of it, but he didn't change his approach. Month after month, he refused every suggestion. He absolutely would not let his son's situation become a public discussion while Louis was still confused and scared about what was happening. And honestly, you can understand why he felt that way. But here's the twist nobody anticipated. The more William protected Louis with silence, the more that silence started spreading everywhere. It slowly began affecting the entire household, and before long, it had touched George and Charlotte too. George was 13 at the time, old enough to know something was seriously wrong, but still too young to actually understand what it was. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he just decided his job was to stay calm and help make things easier. Week after week, he got quieter, more careful. More responsible, more focused on not making things harder. From the outside, it looked like he was handling it fine. His parents actually believed he was coping well, but inside, something was shifting in him. Then there's Charlotte. She was 11, and she handled this completely differently than anyone expected. She noticed every closed door. She caught conversations that suddenly got quiet the second she walked into the room. She heard voices drop and watched adults quickly find excuses to leave. Nobody ever sat her down and explained what was happening or why things felt off. But here's something important to understand. 11-year-olds actually pick up on way more than adults give them credit for. Charlotte slowly started putting pieces together all on her own, and she got surprisingly close to understanding the actual truth. And get this, instead of making it about herself, she quietly decided to focus on helping her little brother. She started writing these handwritten jokes and leaving them beside Louis's bed. Not just once, again and again. It became her own private routine. She'd figured out that whenever Louis laughed, even for just a second, he seemed more like himself again. So she kept giving him those moments without telling a single person what she was doing. But it gets more emotional than that. Later, after overhearing people in the household talking about all the public attention around the family, Charlotte actually went to find her mom. She asked if strangers were worried about Louis, and then she asked something no 11-year-old should ever have to ask. Is Louis going to have to answer questions about all of this? Think about that for a second. That's the kind of worry she shouldn't have been carrying. But because nobody fully explained things, she filled in the blanks herself. Now, while all this was happening, Catherine was dealing with her own heavy burden. She was spending time with Charlotte, gently trying to explain that some things just take time to work through. Meanwhile, Catherine was barely sleeping. She was sitting with her own fears that she didn't want William to notice, but William was doing exactly the same thing on his end. He was hiding his own worries because he wanted to protect Catherine. Neither of them realized they'd completely stopped talking honestly with each other about how they really felt. That's actually where the real problem started. Long periods of stress don't always blow up into huge fights. Sometimes nothing dramatic happens at all. There are no angry words, no obvious distance between you. Instead, kindness just becomes quieter. Conversations get shorter, feelings stay hidden. Before you know it, you're living in the same house but carrying completely separate burdens in complete silence. Right in the middle of all this was 8-year-old Louis. He was way too young to understand how the royal institution even works, but he was absolutely old enough to notice when something felt different. Anyone who's followed the royal family knows exactly what Louis is normally like. He's the kid who brings energy into every single room. He can't sit still during ceremonies. He makes funny faces. He asks endless questions. He fills every moment with his personality. His playful expressions have ended up in newspapers more times than his parents probably wanted. But then everything changed. As the youngest, Louis had never been expected to carry the same weight as George or Charlotte. People talked about George's future. They discussed Charlotte's role. But Louis, he was just allowed to be a kid. That was one of the kindest decisions his parents ever made. Except it also meant nobody had prepared him for what was about to happen. One day, he just stopped going places. No full explanation for why. What he noticed wasn't some formal conversation. It was way quieter than that. The house got quieter. Adults lowered their voices. The whole atmosphere shifted little by little. Even an 8-year-old could feel something wasn't right anymore. That growing silence is what led to the night everything finally exploded into the open. It happened after the kids went to bed, during a private conversation between William and Catherine. And that's when the turning point actually came. From that moment forward, nothing would ever feel quite the same. Catherine had written things down, actually sitting down multiple times and writing on paper by hand, just pouring out her thoughts. When she was done, she put those pages on the table in front of William and asked him to read them. Right next to her handwritten pages was the palace's official draft, all ready to go public. Here's where things got really different. Palace-approved statements are carefully written by advisors before release. Every single word gets chosen for a specific reason. The whole goal is saying just enough without creating new questions or starting fresh headlines. But Catherine felt something was missing. Those carefully written words felt empty to her. They talked about the situation without admitting how terrifying it had really been. They said things were getting better but never explained what the family actually went through. It sounded safe, but it didn't sound real, and that was something she couldn't accept anymore. Then William read the first line of Catherine's version. Before he even got to the second line, he shook his head. He reminded her that once something goes public, it never truly disappears. It gets shared again and again, pulled apart, quoted for years. He asked if she was ready for strangers who've never even met Louis to talk about him for the rest of his life. His voice got louder as he spoke, but halfway through his argument, he suddenly just stopped. And that's when they both realized something. The anger they were hearing wasn't really anger at all. It was fear disguised as strong words. But Catherine refused to back down. She quietly told William something that changed everything. Louis had started believing he was being kept away from public because his own family was ashamed of him. Not because he was sick, not because anything was wrong with him, but because at just 8 years old, he'd noticed that he was always the one staying behind while everyone else went out. He saw the pattern. Nobody explained why. When he walked into rooms, conversations stopped. People got quiet. Like any kid would, he created his own answer, and the answer he came up with was absolutely heartbreaking. He convinced himself he was the problem. That was the painful result of trying to protect him. The plan designed to keep him safe had slowly made him question his own worth. Catherine pushed that official palace draft across the table. She told William that nothing in those carefully chosen words sounded anything like the little boy they'd nearly watched lose confidence in himself. And that wasn't even all of it. She pointed out that George and Charlotte had also been affected. George had become hyper-aware of every closed door in the house. Charlotte had learned to lower her voice whenever Louis got mentioned. She was even leaving little jokes on his bed, because she'd figured out by herself that making him laugh brought back the happy brother she knew. That night, William and Catherine finally reached a turning point together. Catherine would speak out, but only to a certain point. She had no interest in sharing every private detail of what they'd been through. But she was done pretending the past several months had been easy, or anything close to it. That's when things started actually changing. But even after they agreed on what they wanted to say, one person still had the power to stop the entire statement. That person was King Charles. He was also the one person in the family who truly understood what they were going through, because he'd lived through it himself. Later that evening, Charles got the draft after one of his regular briefings. Before he even read it, he quietly asked everyone else to leave the room. Then he sat alone and carefully read every single page. When he finished, he went back and read it all over again. But then something caught his attention. He reached the line about a child confusing privacy with shame. He slowly took off his glasses, placed them on the desk, and just sat there for several moments without moving. There was a reason that sentence hit him so hard. Charles had spent his entire life inside a royal system that teaches people to hide their feelings before they're even old enough to understand the cost of that kind of silence. He learned that as a child. He later passed it on to his own sons. And one of those sons has spent the last 20 years publicly talking about the emotional damage that approach caused. Charles asked his son just one question. Was this statement truly meant to help Louis, or was it just making the adults around him feel better about themselves? It was a difficult question, but also the right one. Every family believes it's protecting its child during hard times. But sometimes, without realizing it, the adults are actually just protecting themselves from having to say painful things out loud. The untold removed the only part where Louis himself got to say thank you to the people who'd supported him. They'd taken out the one sentence that actually sounded like it came from the young prince himself. That became the deciding moment. Charles refused to approve that edited version. He believed that removing Louis's own words might protect the monarchy, but it would fail the child at the very center of the story. So here's what I want to know. What do you think about all of this? Comment below and share your thoughts with everyone. And if this story moved you or taught you something, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these deeper royal stories. Thanks for watching.